Hi, welcome to my channel if you're new, welcome back if you're a subscriber. So today's a little bit of a different video on my channel because I haven't talked about horror movies yet on my channel before. If you don't know, I am a booktuber, Riveting Reads. My name's Sav, and I talk about thriller and horror books that I read. You can kind of see my library behind me. This is my normal filming setup. But I've been talking about this for a while in my videos. I really do want to make some horror movie videos because the horror genre, in all forms, books and also movies, just has a special place in my heart. I have loved horror movies for years. I love horror movies for how many emotions they evoke in me. I have my comfort horror movies like the Scream franchise. I also love horror movies that are terrifying to me, that give me adrenaline. I just love the genre. And so I want to talk more about horror movies on my channel. So I was watching the most recent Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie and realized, why don't I just do a review video on that movie as my first, movie video on my channel? So here we are. I do want to say I'm not particularly a fan of the franchise, I would say, because there's a lot of the movies in the franchise that I don't have interest in watching. I've seen the original, of course, and this is just such an iconic movie that was exceptionally well done. It changed the direction of horror and was so influential in the genre and is just so terrifying and gritty, and I don't think anything really comes close to the feeling that that original evokes in the viewer. It really feels like a snuff film. It feels like you're watching a real life account of people being murdered. And so that film, of course, I recognize as being an exceptional film. It's not in my top favorite films though because of the rewatchability factor and the fact that I just didn't totally love my viewing experience because it just felt so real. And so I, of course, have seen that one though, and I do want to rewatch it after seeing some of the newer Texas Chainsaw movies. But I am not interested in a lot of the movies that follow up until the 2003 remake, which I did watch. I actually really enjoyed it. I found it really scary, but in a totally different way than the original. The atmosphere was totally different. And then I have seen the 2006 prequel, and then I do want to see the other movies that come after that. And of course, I've seen the most recent one. So I'll be going through things in sections in this video, so I'll be talking about non-spoilers and my review of what I did and didn't like, and then going into spoilers. So make sure you check out the timestamps to know what you want to see in this video and how to skip or go to the sections that you want to visit. But anyway, without further ado, let's get into the review. So this movie is directed by David Blue Garcia, and it stars Sarah Yarkin, Elsie Fisher, Jacob Lattimore, and Mark Burnham as Leatherface. After nearly 50 years of hiding, Leatherface returns to terrorize a group of friends who accidentally disrupt his carefully shielded world in a remote Texas town. This group is going to the Texas town because they have purchased it to try to gentrify the area and escape the violence of bigger cities, which is ironic because of what they end up walking into. So as a side note, this is a direct sequel to the 1974 version of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And so it doesn't consider any of the sequels relevant to this one and just directly takes off from there. And I will say that Leatherface is supposed to be like 70 years old, which is absolutely ridiculous that he's supposed to be this old because of how he acts in the movie. He's very mobile, extremely strong, and yeah, you kind of have to put this aside to enjoy this movie and not take it too seriously. So the atmosphere in this movie is quite different from the original. So the original is extremely gritty. It almost feels as if you're watching real events and actually a snuff film. It's so unsettling how it's filmed, where it's just filmed with clippy frames, and the sound effects and everything that goes into it really just gives you almost a found footage style movie where you're just watching real life events occur. Whereas this new one, the sequel, definitely feels like you're watching a movie. It feels campy and it lacks that grittiness of the first movie. Now, depending on your movie taste, you may like the campy feel, but if you do like that grittiness from the first movie, you don't get that here because this takes place in a town and not on the rural farmhouse. So the movie really delves into this setup and background about why the characters are going to this small town and what's going on, and I honestly was not interested in any of it. I thought it was super random and it wasn't cohesive at all. And there was sort of this whole school shooting backstory that was thrown into this movie that just felt really choppy and like bad writing, and it honestly didn't fit. It felt very forced, and I'm not even quite sure what the movie was trying to do with this plot. So I will say I really didn't like that whole backstory, and the setup was just not it for me. Also, the characters are all pretty unlikable, I will say. There's one character who maybe you might like, but for the most part, they're very unlikable. And you know, you don't have to like characters in a slasher movie. I will say though, I generally like at least someone to root for, and throughout this movie, you're not really rooting for any of the characters in particular. You're just kind of there to see the gore, the kills, and the action. This movie also followed suit in the trope of bringing back a final girl from the original film, and this is a trope that has been used in Scream as well as Halloween, and it just really felt forced into this story. So the original final girl, Sally Hardesty, returns to have her revenge on Leatherface. But I'll talk more about my thoughts on this in the spoilery section at the end. So this movie is extremely gory, so if you like gore in your movies, I think you will enjoy this one. I will say that it is digital gore, you know, practical effects were not used, and you can see that, but I will say it didn't bother me too much. I would have preferred that they used practical gore, but it still worked in the movie. And also, the ending of this was very divisive. You'll have to leave in the comments if you've seen this movie, if you liked the ending or if you hated it, but it was very divisive and shocking. And honestly, I'm sort of in the camp that didn't mind it, kind of liked it. So let's get into the portion of what I really liked in the movie. And I will say my favorite part of the movie was the cinematography and just how it looked visually. It was a beautifully shot movie. I loved the rich tones, and I also loved the neon tones, especially in the bus scene. I absolutely loved that. I thought it was great to look at. The whole sunflower field scene that was in this was visually stunning. I know that, you know, Leatherface popping out of the sunflower field is kind of a meme, but still, you know, jokes aside, I really love the look of that sunflower field. On the bus scene, there was so much war that happened, and it really reminded me of sort of a zombie movie feel, and I just thought that scene was excellently done. I will say one thing, I'll get into it more of what I didn't like, but the whole live streaming aspect of it, that annoyed me so much. I thought it was so unnecessary and sort of took me out of the scene before all the action happened. Also, another thing I liked is this movie is pretty short, so it never was boring. It really had a good flow. It was maybe a tad bit slow towards the middle of it, but for the most part, you know, I was engaged the whole time and it was fast, it gave me what I wanted, and so that was a positive for me. I also love some of the mysterious framing in this. Sometimes you don't see all of Leatherface, so it sort of gives this eerie, mysterious feel where some things are off camera. Also, the first death scene in this was very, very creative. I've never seen anything like it in a horror movie before. And right after that first kill, there was so much tension in a scene that happens in a sunflower field that I don't want to give away, but the tension in that scene was expertly done. So let's talk about what I didn't like. Like I mentioned before, I did not like the whole subplot of the school shooting. I thought it was messy and it just didn't make any sense and wasn't clear what it was trying to say. Also, like I said before, I wanted more practical effects and less CG gore. Another thing is I didn't care about any of the characters. I wasn't really rooting for anyone, and I like to root at least for someone. And in this, you just didn't care. At least I didn't. I do want to point out that some people were upset in the way that Leatherface acted. He set some traps for his victims, and that is just kind of not characteristic of the character from the first film. This didn't particularly bother me as I watched it, but it definitely made me think for a second. This is not really following the original Leatherface character. All right, so my lovely camera decided to stop filming, so if the framing is different, that's why, but I'm picking up on what I didn't like. And the whole bringing Sally Hardesty back just really wasn't it for me. They wanted it to be this really dramatic, you know, revenge thing, and it just didn't work. And then the last thing I want to say about what I didn't like before my spoilers is the whole live streaming element on the bus really took me out of the scene and just felt really unnecessary. I know they were trying to modernize it, but I just didn't like that insertion in there. And I did really love the rest of the bus scene, but that beginning part before any of the action happens, I just found really cheesy and campy in not a good way. So for my rating, I give it a 3 out of 5 stars, which is a pretty decent rating. I really did enjoy watching this movie. I thought it was a fun time, and I honestly kind of want to go back and rewatch it. So that's why I gave it that rating. It was just visually so stunning and really fast paced, and I really liked the kill scenes. They were great. And just in comparison to the original, for me personally, this has way more of a rewatchability factor to it, just because it's more of a light-hearted experience than the extremely uncomfortable, claustrophobic, gritty original that is truly terrifying. This one isn't really scary, but that's just my opinion on the rewatchability factor of it. All right, so let's get into spoilers. And if you comment anything spoilery related in the comments, please make sure to just really mark it and make it clear so other people, if they haven't seen the movie, can skip your comment. But the biggest thing in this whole movie that annoyed me so much was the whole bringing back the original final girl to just kill her off. And honestly, it just did not work for me. The whole revenge plot was just, I didn't like it at all. It felt like it was copying other movies, and it didn't make really much sense in the context of the story. Also, what made me so annoyed was when she finally confronts Leatherface, she points her gun at him and she asks, you know, do you remember me? Of course, he doesn't remember her. And then she just decides to let him walk past her and leave. And I know that they couldn't let him, you know, die at that point of the movie, but it just seemed so ridiculous and unbelievable. I just wanted to yell at the screen and be like, what are you doing? Why did you not just shoot Leatherface? What is going on? Also, the scene where he cuts off his mother's face is so uncomfortable to watch, and that whole scene actually of the girlfriend being in the car trying to figure out how to still appear dead and how to escape was probably the most tense scene and most well done scene, I think, in the whole movie because of how she acts so terrified. It's very believable. I loved her acting. And I just felt so tense during that scene. And when he does pop up, it is really startling. It's kind of a jump scare and is really scary. Also, let's talk about the ending. So when the older sister finally, you know, shoves Leatherface into the pool with the chainsaw, you don't see anything underwater, which I just thought was really weird. And I kind of wanted to see something underwater. I mean, you know, I get that maybe they were trying to build tension, but the whole cut from that scene to the last scene where the sisters are in the car about to go and, you know, be final girls together just felt a little weird and abrupt. I will say the very ending scene where she's snatched up by Leatherface and decapitated was a really fun ending. I actually really enjoyed that. I know there's a spectrum of people who loved it and people who hated it, and I kind of fall in the I really enjoyed it. Also, it was just really, really shocking and surprising to me, which I don't know why it was surprising because this is a common trope in horror movies where the villain isn't really dead, but it really caught me off guard. And lastly, I want to say the woman who witnesses Dante's death runs back to the bus and doesn't say anything to anybody. I just couldn't believe it. I was like, how is this woman not saying anything to anybody? Yes, she's saying, you know, close the doors, don't go out there. But of course, she didn't tell the bus driver or anyone else that she witnessed a literal death. And so the bus driver goes out and dies, of course. And that whole scene was just ridiculous to me. I did, of course, love the bus scene after the live stream element. But yeah, I just couldn't believe she didn't say anything. All right, so that's it for this video. I will hopefully be doing more horror movie videos coming up soon, and I'll talk to y'all in the next video. Bye.